Well, good morning, everybody. Once again, I hope all is well. I'm going to pick up where we left off a little bit on our last discussion in Genesis. I was in communication with one of my nephews, and we were talking about the discussion last week, and he would begin to tell me some of the challenges he's been having um, over the last 6 months or so, with a friend of his with an illness. And he just, he began to tell me the journey that they had to go down in this, and how the messages and the videos that I was sending out, how it walked him through those processes. Now, mind you, I knew there was some level of struggle that was going on, but I didn't have any detail. And he was able to give me his testimony after the fact, and was very powerful. I'm going to see if he would allow us to have that discussion so you guys can hear directly from them what transpired. But nonetheless, to recap what this discussion was, he was talking about how there were some critical moments in the health of his friend that he had to make some decisions. But unbeknownst to him, they were life-threatening, immediate decisions that he did not realize the complexity of until after the fact. Hear me? And we begin. So as he was talking to me, I said, you got to understand, if you listen to last week's podcast, we talked about how Adam in Genesis 2, God gave him the authority to name all the wild beasts and all the entities and beings that God created. And I began to talk to him about, how much time that took and how much interaction that Adam would have had to have with God, but to get through the process of naming all of the entities. There was time spent with God. There was a flow. There was an atmosphere that was created. And there's an atmosphere to you who's listening to me right now that is created when you have fellowship with God. When you sit down and you have conversations and you have dialogue. See, you can't, it's just like with a relationship in your marriage or someone you're dating. You cannot grow that relationship without dialogue, without interaction. There is a give and take in a relationship. You guys know what I'm talking about. A healthy relationship has give and take where you can communicate by word and gesture. Hear me? So there was a level of communication that Adam had with God. I believe that it has to be greater than anything that we've read about in the Bible, because you have to know that they were in constant connection and communication with each other every day, and you'll see what I mean by that later on in Genesis 3, when they sinned. God came and asked Adam, "Where are you?" He asked that question because he was used to seeing Adam and dialoguing. There was a constant there. This wasn't I call you every other week, or I pray when I need something, or I'm going to call on you, God, when I'm in trouble or crisis. There was a relationship developed. I'm going somewhere with this. So I began to tell him, I heard you when you said, you've been listening to the podcast. You told me that you don't normally go to church, and this was your avenue or connection with God, listening to the podcast and in the videos that I've been sending out, and you formed a relationship. And I told him the reason why, getting back to his story, the reason why you subconsciously, not even understanding what you were doing, made the right decision to save your friend is because, whether you knew it or not, you were hearing from God. You established a relationship. So in that, at one point there was a time where they had to call an ambulance, And it was an emergency, but it was a more emergency than he thought it was. And the doctors told him that if he had waited the next morning, like normally what we would do, okay, that can wait. Oh, well, you know what? It's been a long day. We can deal with that. But this time, he said, yeah, you know what? We're going to go right now. Hear me, guys. We're going to go right now. That was an unction in his spirit that, no, you can't wait till tomorrow for this. Even though you don't understand, I'm going to press it. See, he was hearing from God. Once again, he was in relationship. He was in relationship with God. He built a relationship. So therefore, he was communicating, and he was sensitive enough to hear that voice say, no, this time you need to go. You need to go. And thank God that he did. The doctors ultimately, after the fact, told him, yeah, I'm glad you followed your mind or your heart on bringing your friend. Because if you'd have waited till the next day, you wouldn't have a friend right now. It wouldn't have been, there wasn't going to be any such thing as, oh, we'll deal with that tomorrow. It was that critical that she got here now. Hear me, guys. That became because he was hearing from God. And he was hearing from God because he established a relationship. When you establish a relationship in the atmosphere of hearing from God, you got to know that your thinking is in a better place than when you're not. Hear me. Adam named all the wild beasts. Anything that you can picture, and Adam named it. Hear me. You got to understand that that doesn't happen outside of God's atmosphere. He was able to tap in and to name and have the creative juices to see that when it was presented to him, oh, this is this. When he seen that, oh, that's that. It was because he was in the atmosphere. Here, we're talking about creating atmospheres. If you want an atmosphere that is conducive to life and not death, you want an atmosphere that's conducive to grace and mercy, that atmosphere comes when you are around God. How many of you know those times that you've taken yourself out of the queue, or you've forsaken the fellowship, or you're not praying like you used to, and you feel like unfulfilled? It just doesn't feel right. See, once you're used to it, it doesn't feel right when you're out of it. And a lot of us have to go back and find our first love. The contrast to what I'm saying right now is in the very next chapter, we'll get into 3, where Adam and Eve were having conversations with Satan. Okay, different atmosphere. Now, we just painted the picture of what Adam was able to achieve when he was in God's atmosphere. Okay? He was able to be pinpoint and exact. Even to the point where when God brought the woman to him, bone of his bone, and presented it to him, he exclaimed, oh my God, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She'll be called woman. Hear me. He was that in tune. He knew when he saw her. Once again, there's going to be an upcoming conversation I'm going to have with you guys about you'll know it when you see it. Adam knew when he saw her, when he saw Eve at the time, before he called her Eve, she was just woman. He knew once he saw her that she was the suitable helper. He didn't have to figure it out. He didn't have to think about it. He didn't have to go pray on it. He didn't have to go fast and pray and get on his knees. He knew when it was presented to him what it was. Hear me, guys. You'll know it when you see it. Stop trying to figure stuff out. You'll know it when you see it. When you're in tune with God and it's presented to you, you'll know it when you see it. Hear me on that. You'll know it when you see it. Anyway, when you're outside of God's atmosphere and you're not in the flow, when you're not following the cloud and you're off left when you should be right, you're susceptible to making terrible decisions. I've been practicing, and I was telling one of my other nephews, the other day that I'm practicing not making decisions or being so preemptive to have to address situations, problems, and questions immediately. I told him, man, that's all possible right now in my life. I'm pushing it off until the next day. He said, why would you do that when you already know the answer? Well, I'm understanding that during the late evenings or when something comes on late in the day, especially in the evenings, I'm tired. Sometimes I'm mentally tired, and I'm usually make the wrong decision in the evening hours, or I make a different decision in the evening hours than I would wait than I would if I waited the very next morning. I found that to be true in my life, that what I struggled with that night was easy for me that morning. It was clear on what the answer was. Not only that, I didn't allow people, man, the enemy, force me into addressing or dancing to the beat of his drum and answering his question immediately. No, you're going to wait. I'll address it tomorrow. Now, there's sometimes you can't do that, but there's a whole lot of times you can. And what I found is that when I put it off and I addressed it when I was fresh, and after I've given my first fruits to God and I've had conversations and I'm at peace, it's easy. It's easy. But there's a lot of times when I make decisions in the evening hours after I've had the dust of the day on me. Hear me. When I say the dust of the day, I'm talking about dealing with and navigating this world that we're all in that's not of God. There's residue that comes with that. There's residue that comes with that. And sometimes I've made a lot of times, I'm going to say that, a lot of times I made the wrong decisions when I was tired. And I was tired of wrestling with the day. You got to know when you're tired, you're not as quick. When you've been dealing with the residue of the day, you're not as quick. I'm saying all that to say that Adam, in the atmosphere that he was in the conversation with Satan, he made the worst decision ever. Hear me. Let's paint this picture. We already know that in Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve were talking to Satan and Satan deceived Eve and Adam transgressed, we already know prior to any of this happening, God, in his one-on-one time with Adam, gave him clear instructions. You are not to eat of the tree of life and death. You are not to touch. You are not to eat of the tree. Hear me. It was clear. Adam had clear direction. It was an open book test. There was no debate. There was no, I need to go pray on that. It was very clear. But how can it be that what appears to be an open book test was failed so bad? Well, let's talk about atmosphere again. Once again, what atmosphere are you in? Adam and Eve was not in God's atmosphere when they were standing there talking to Satan. Hear me, guys. Adam and Eve were not in the same atmosphere as they were when they were in God's atmosphere, as they were when they're in Satan's atmosphere. And in Satan's atmosphere, and that setting, Adam failed a test that he knew the answer to. The wrong atmospheres can affect your outcomes. The decisions that you make in the wrong atmospheres, you need to question. You need to hold on those. Because most likely, you're going to make the wrong decision because the atmosphere ain't right. We talk about atmospheres. How many guys know when back when we used to go hang out, and some of us still do now. You know, I remember as a youngster when I was going to hang out, when I was going to party, whatever, I hyped myself up before I got to the party. Hear me. Hear me. I didn't wait to get to the party to get hyped. I was getting hyped on the way there. I was setting my atmosphere by whatever I was drinking or by whatever I was smoking before I got to the party. Hear me. When I got to the party, I was already right. I didn't have to get right. I was right because I created an atmosphere that I wanted to be in. And hear me, guys, I'm going to say this too. In that atmosphere, sometimes I created that atmosphere and I'd hype myself up in the atmosphere just to do the dirt that I wanted to do that night. I did that. Some of us have done that. Let's not act like that didn't happen. I know better now. But I created the atmosphere that I wanted to wallow in. Hear me. Hear me. And don't you know, the next day when you wake up, you're like, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Why was I there? That's not even who I am. But the atmosphere made it very easy to divulge in whatever that is. Hear me, guys. We're talking about atmospheres today. What atmosphere are you creating? I'm at a stage in my life. Well, let's get back to my story. So I told the young man, my nephew, is that you were able, once again, you were able to make the right decision and hear from God because your atmosphere was one of that you could hear from him. It wasn't contaminated with all the stuff because you were following the word. You were praying. You were in tune with him. And when you needed to know to move and go right opposed to going left, opposed to waiting till the next day, he gave you the answer and you heard it. You heard the silent voice because you were in a place in an atmosphere to hear him. I'm at a stage in my life right now, and you know we all go through stages. I'm in a stage in my life to develop. And the word is developed this week, and it's been that way for a while now. We're talking about development. I'm trying to intentionally develop my atmospheres. I'm intentionally, with intentionality, I'm trying to intentionally develop a different atmosphere for the stage I am with my wife. I'm going to be doing some things differently because I'm trying to create the atmosphere that I'm trying to create the atmosphere that I want to see in this season in our lives. We're different people now. What used to work or what was the things that are old, it's different now. We're at a different stage. I have a different level of wisdom. I have a different desire for my wife and my family now. So I need to change the atmospheres. I need to do some things differently. Certain things I used to do, I don't need to do them anymore. And I need to wait it out. I need to see when you let it develop and you try to develop atmospheres, it takes time. You heard me say in times before, anything that's worth anything is going to cost you something. Eve, the woman that he instantly knew when he saw it, cost him something. It cost him part of his side. It cost him something. Anything that's worth anything is going to cost you something. Hear me. Just like he knew the woman was bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh, he knew there was something great in that suitable helper. He knew it. It cost him something. Hear me. When Adam and Eve was deceived and they transgressed and they partook of the tree that God told them not to, it cost them something. It cost them something because it was worth everything. Hear me, guys. Create your atmospheres. Be aware of your atmospheres. Understand that atmospheres will taint your judgment. It can taint it for the bad or it can bless it for the good. Your atmospheres are everything. There's certain people you ought not hang around. There are certain people you ought not hang around because they don't produce the right atmosphere. You know who I'm talking about. Guys, let's work on intentionally controlling our atmospheres to the best of our abilities. How about we do that? Let's work on that. Amen. We'll talk soon.